Hello everybody, my name is Nick. I'm a senior at Utah Valley University, majoring in biology. I'm applying to dental school this cycle, and I want to make a video about how the DAT went for me. I had a goal of a 22, and I started studying in about January. My test was May 20th, and I got a 23 with a 25 PAT. So I'm very excited about my score. So I just want to make a video to jump into that today. So the video will go over each section of the DAT. The first section is the biggest and the most daunting is the biology section for the DAT. I ended up getting a 22 on my actual test, and I would say I'm like a little disappointed with that score. On my practice tests across the board, I was averaging like a 24 in biology, and so to see a 22, I wouldn't say like unhappy, I was just like unimpressed with myself. I would say the practice questions are most similar to questions you'll experience on DAT booster practice exams, and some are very similar to the question banks. However, the question banks for DAT booster go a little too far in depth, in my opinion. So I would, if you're practicing the question banks, don't get too hung up on missing any particular question, especially if it's like a specific detail that's like 10 feet deep in the question. Like, you want to stay near the surface of depth of knowledge. So I'd say booster was the most representative. However, boot camp was also very helpful. I feel like on whether you check on like YouTube or the pre-dental Reddit, you'll hear people talk about how similar or level of difficulty booster was to boot camp. Some people say booster is easier and boot camp's harder. And on my practice test, I saw virtually no difference in my score between a booster and boot camp practice test. If anything, I was scoring a little higher on boot camp than I was on booster. So just take feedback, even my video feedback, with a grain of salt. Back to the biology section. So for biology, I would highly recommend starting the Anki deck sooner than later. You can get boosters or boot camp's Anki deck. There's a million videos out there on YouTube for how to use Anki, how to utilize it properly. And so definitely look those up. Get started on Anki deck today. Most like 8, 10, or 12 week study schedules for the DAT will have you start somewhere around day 30. I do not advise that. I would recommend starting sooner than later. That way you can start chipping away at this giant iceberg of biology content. For my personal studying, I mainly focused on the question banks with booster. There's so many questions. There's, I'm sure, well over 2,000 questions. And I mainly used those as study material. Now what I would do is I watched about half of the videos and realized I knew a lot of this material, and so I didn't want to really waste my time watching any more lecture videos about it. So instead I hopped straight into the question banks and kind of got a gauge for how well I was retaining that, or how well I remembered it from when I learned it a few years ago in my classes. And like I said previously, you're going to come across questions that are so in detail that you probably won't need to know. So I'd focus more on the breadth over depth. I'm sure you've heard a lot. So I focused on those practice questions and questions from practice tests. And then if I would miss a biology question, I would make my own Anki card of that question with the full explanation provided. That way, in my review, if I was missing the question, then I could see the full explanation and get it right the next time. For biology, on my real test, same things, practice test, 40 questions. You see the first questions you'll see on the DAT, so you might be a little nervous going into it. Take a deep breath, it's gonna be okay. If you've done plenty of study or plenty of practice tests, it's gonna be nothing like you haven't seen before. It's gonna be nothing new, I should say. But I will say, on my particular test, I had about 6 questions that were, I would say, fairly difficult. I thought about 30 of them were pretty easy, very surface level biology questions. 4 I felt like okay about, and then those 6 I feel like were pretty tough. I think that's why I got a 22, is I think I maybe like split them right down the middle, or got some right and some wrong out of those. So I would recommend to not make that same mistake as me, I would recommend on starting the Anki deck sooner, the provided Anki deck with the material there. For my Anki, I started the biology deck and stopped because for me it was a little overwhelming looking at the 3,000 or 2,000 cards in one deck and not adjusting the settings. I would not advise that. I think that I could have gotten a much better score in biology if I would have taken the time to actually memorize all of the biology Anki cards. So if you're looking to get a higher score than 22 on bio, I recommend starting early with the Anki. All right, the next section for the DAT is the general chemistry section. And on my practice test for general chemistry, I was averaging anywhere from a 20 to a 23. On my actual test, I got a 22. So it was kind of right in that range of the scores I was getting. I felt good about that score. I wasn't like thrilled about a 22 on that section, but I felt like I could have done better. And why do I say that? I say that because some of the questions I had on my actual DAT for general chemistry were literally like the bare bone basic questions of general chemistry. It wasn't like converting moles to grams or back and forth, vice versa, or whatever. Those I understand fairly well. Stoichiometry I understand very well. It was like setting up equations, setting up questions, not like conversion factors, but just like setting up like where you put a prefix, where does that go? Does that go in the, is that like an exponent or is that a whatever? Anyways, it was like the very basic questions that were throwing me off. And I think that's because some of the practice questions honestly go a little too in detail on the general chemistry section. So if I were you, I would make sure you have a solid foundation when going into your DAT study or when conducting your DAT study for general chemistry. Make sure you understand the basics, because more than likely you're going to get questions that are just referencing some basic concepts that if you have a firm understanding of, you can easily guarantee yourself, at least 20 plus correct questions on the DAT. On mine, there were like 5, I would say, setting up questions that I kind of struggled with, and the rest I felt very confident in, and I think those are the ones that may have went against me on my actual tests. But overall advice for general chemistry is start the Anki deck. For that one, you don't have to start as soon. I felt like a lot of the material for the Anki deck was, how do I say it? It's not as like intense as the biology, because the general chemistry Anki deck only has like 200 or 300 cards. So what I would very much advise is when you're missing questions on the general chemistry sections of your practice stats, make flashcards of those questions so that you're reviewing them consistently. You're going to get a lot of the same style of questions on practice tests that you get on the real DAT. There's only like so many questions they can ask for general chemistry, and so if you can become familiar with that style of question, you can guarantee yourself some good points on the general chemistry section. But besides that, general tips: review what you're missing, of course, review fundamentals heavily, and take lots of chemistry practice tests. The next section of the Survey of Natural Sciences is the organic chemistry section. And this section on my practice test I was averaging about a 20 to 23, sort of the same as scores as I was getting in general chemistry, but I wasn't really studying organic chemistry. That's because while studying for the DAT, I was finishing up organic chemistry too. And so I was putting a lot of time in class studying for the course. And on top of that, I'm also the supplemental instructor at my school for organic chemistry 1. So I was getting, every week I was hosting like 4 or 5 hour-long study sessions while sitting in organic chemistry 1 lectures and reviewing that material almost on a daily basis while studying for organic chemistry 2. So I kind of neglected organic chemistry study for the DAT because I felt very confident in my organic chemistry. On the actual test, I ended up getting a perfect 30 on the organic chemistry, and I'm out of my whole test breakdown. I'm most proud of that. Organic chemistry is, I'm sure other pre-dentals or anyone watching this has heard, you're going to hear people say, oh, it's so hard. You're going to hear people talk about how many times they have to take it. And how they just want to get through it and just get a B or whatever. And for me, I kind of went in with that same mindset of this is going to be difficult. But instead of listening to that, I kind of tuned all that out and was like, I'm going to do my best and just see what happens, and end up getting very good grades in both OChem 1 and OChem 2. However, studying for organic chemistry on the DAT, it's most important you're very comfortable with, like general chemistry fundamentals. If there's going to be 1-step or 2-step reactions, and general reaction mechanisms and different reagents and products, it's very important to just be familiar with the basics. You don't want to go into it feeling not confident, and if they hit you with a hydroboration question, you not knowing if that's Martinikov's or anti-Martinikov's addition, for example. So what I would recommend is start early on the Anki deck for organic chemistry. The organic chemistry deck only has, I think, 500 cards. However, they're like repeats of the same, like one card will be the reagents, another will be the products of a reaction. So be aware of that. You're going to see like very similar cards, but I thought that was very helpful. I was doing that for the last like 3 weeks before my test, but I didn't start practice questions until 3 days before my test. And Booster has a bunch of, in their question banks for OChem, they have all basically the chapters of organic chemistry laid out or style of questions. And so for each day, for the 3 days leading up to my test, I did a third of the questions in all the question banks. And so that way I was had done all the practice questions the night before my test. I think that helped me the most, as there were a few questions on my test that were exactly questions that Booster had in their question banks, which made it very easy. On the OChem, I thought the OChem like level of difficulty was way miles easier than what you see on practice tests. It basically was just fundamentals, like, do you understand what this reaction does? And like I said before, I felt very confident in that. There was one question that I was genuinely a 50-50 on, but I gave it my best guess, and it must have went in my favor to get the 30. So for OChem, start on the reaction mechanisms, products, reagents early, and the best way to do that is through the Anki deck, whether Booster or Bootcamp, doesn't really matter, just whatever you prefer. If you're having a hard time like finding those, like literally just Google a Booster Anki deck. They're free. Like, you don't need to pay the whatever, a few $100 you don't need the Booster subscription or Bootcamp subscription to access those. So yeah, I'd recommend starting those early and doing as many practice questions as you can. The next section of the DAT is the Perceptual Ability Test, the PAT. You get 90 questions in 60 minutes. And for this, when I took my first practice test for PAT, I did terrible. Not because I'm an idiot, but because most of the time you'll never have even seen questions like angle ranking, cube counting, hole punching, like top front end. Who does that in their free time, right? So my biggest piece of advice is start early. I kind of like casually started studying for the DAT, or just becoming familiar with some of the concepts in November, and my test was in May. And so for November, December, I really just did like 15 questions of PAT a day, like even just like 1 or 2 questions from each section. That way I could kind of start training my brain to get used to seeing a keyhole or top front end question, because I was really having a hard time with those 2 sections in particular, or subsections in particular. As for angle ranking, you just need to do every single day. From January to May, I did 10 questions every night before bed of angle ranking, and I felt like that was my saving grace, because man, some of those angles are tough to see, and if you can just see, if you're seeing them every day, you're going to get so good at just having a natural like gut instinct of what the answer is going to be, or which one's bigger than the other. So definitely start early on those. As far as cube counting, hole punching, and pattern folding, I feel like those are the easiest to get 100% on. Obviously, the first time you take a practice test, you're probably not going to get 100%, and that's okay. Like, please don't get discouraged, because I was doing not very well my first time either. But practicing those every day, you're going to get amazed how easily and how quickly you become very competent in recognizing those questions and seeing how to fold them or whatnot. So I feel like try your best to max out the number of correct answers on on those 3 sections. The next section that I would say you can max out on quite easily with practice is top front end. For most people, it's just they need to see hundreds of top front end questions over the course of a few months to really get comfortable with it. That was the case for me. When I first started studying, I was getting like 2 out of 15 correct on top front end. Once my brain became in tune with that style of question, I could almost get 100% every time on those in practice tests. So trying your best to max out those sections so that the harder sections, at least for me, were angle ranking and keyhole. You can give yourself some wiggle room, so to speak. I'm missing some of those, but on my practice tests, I was averaging, I think, around 20 in my first few practice tests, and then I got up to about 24, 25, and I kind of let off the gas with my PAT once I hit that score, because I know it doesn't factor into the academic average or total science. So I sort of let off the gas on PATing, and it wasn't until a week before my test that I really started focusing on doing 15 questions for each section a day, and I ended up getting a 25 on the real thing. I was very happy with a 25. On the test, the angles were like, I would say, harder than they were on practice tests, so I wasn't confident when I moved on from the PAT that I did very well. Cube counting, pounder folding, hole punch, I felt good in, but the keyhole and angle ranking, man, they can just, they can wreck you, so be aware of that. Also, I felt like boot camp was more representative than booster for all of the PAT. If you're like me and you use the generators a lot to study the PAT generators from booster, you're going to be surprised when you go into the real test and suddenly you're looking at cube counting questions from different angles. And I'm not talking about floating cubes. I'm talking about literally your point of view is different. Same thing for angle ranking. A lot of the times in practice tests, it'll be like one short side, one long side, like this, or they'll all be different angles. I felt like the real test had a wider variety of things and a wider variety of viewpoints and angles you'll experience in practice tests. So just be aware of that. I feel like boot camp would be the best way to practice and prepare yourself for that. Also, the pattern folding was nothing. I didn't have a single generator like pattern. I didn't have a key. I didn't have a dice. I didn't have or the U shape. I didn't have any recognizable shapes. It was all completely unique shades too. So just be aware of that. I would practice like the tiered questions within booster or the practice test questions within the bootcamp tests to get better practice for PAT. Other than that, my biggest suggestion would just be stay on top of PAT. Don't let it fall to the wayside because it doesn't count towards academic average. Do your best to train your brain to start thinking in PAT terms and treat it like a game. And it's kind of fun once you start doing that. I started to enjoy my PAT studies near the end. So don't get discouraged and keep at it and you'll do fine. The next section we're going to talk about is the most frustrating section for me, reading comprehension. And I'm not saying that because I think I'm a bad reader or anything. I'm saying that because it was the least representative from my all 15 practice full-length tests I took to the real test. On the practice test, I was averaging a 25 plus in reading, and so I felt very confident going into my real test. Little bit of background: I've been an avid reader my whole life. Every year, I try to read like a book a week if I can. I typically get like 20 or 30 books in the year and then stop. But so reading comprehension, I felt very good about, and so I kind of let off the gas near the end on reading comp. The biggest difference I would say between practice tests and the real thing was the real thing can really hit you with curveballs for length and density. My first passage I had, I'll never forget, was 18 long, dense paragraphs in one passage, and man, time management was so hard for that. I tried my best to work through it as quick as possible, but I was unprepared and I ended up using about 25 to 28 minutes out of the hour I have on the first passage. Now, if anyone who's done reading comprehension knows, that's way too much time on one passage. My next two were, I think one was 12 and the other was 14, so they were like decent length after, but the first one really got me on time, and the second you're behind on time is the second you're doing yourself a disservice. So my biggest suggestion, and to learn from my mistake, is I would practice by giving yourself 50 minutes, not an hour, 50 on practice tests. And I think that'll help you because you'll find the operating system on the computers in the Prometric Center, they're just slower than adding 2-second delay or using any other computer can create. Like, you can add the 2-second delay in practice test, but every time you click next question or review question on the real DAT, on the reading comp, it will reload the whole passage, and sometimes that takes upwards of 5 seconds. When you're talking about 50 questions in an hour, that can equate to minutes of time. The scrolling is also different. It doesn't like scroll smoothly like on a MacBook or a typical Windows computer at school. If you click at least for my computer, if I scrolled the scroll wheel on the mouse, it would go down one line of text. And if I gave it a big scroll, it would jump to the bottom. So mechanically, I felt underprepared, and that's my own fault. I can't blame that on the test. I can't blame that on the passages. I have to blame that on me and not being prepared, creating more test-like conditions. So that's my fair warning to you. Give yourself 50 minutes on all practice tests, not an hour. That way you'll be moving much faster than the needed pace. That way on the real thing, you'll either be thanking me that you're moving so quickly and getting them all right, or you're going to be hating me because you finished with 10 minutes to spare and you went too quickly and got them all wrong. So I think it'll help you, if anything, by giving yourself less time. So I was averaging 25s plus on practice tests. On the real thing, I got a 20. That's really what's holding my academic average of 23 back. I felt like I could have gotten a higher score if that would have been near my average, but that's okay. They say that on every DAT, there's one section that's a little tough or tougher, and I felt like reading comprehension was that section for me. So don't neglect it. Keep reading, don't keep reading under time conditions and don't slack off, and you'll do great. The last section of the DAT is the QR, or the math. And after the hour of reading comp, you're gonna feel so ready to get this math done because it's the very last thing you have to do on your DAT. And I gotta say, I was the most intimidated by the QR when I began my DAT study. I'm someone who took college algebra over a summer to get it done accelerated and thought I'd never have to touch math again. I hadn't taken math in a few years, so when I first took my practice test, I think I got a 14 or 13 on math. I did so bad, and so I knew it was going to be a struggle to get my math up. The biggest suggestion I would have for math is, one, download the Anki deck for math. I know I've said that about all the science sections, but it's true, it works. Memorize the formulas just in case. Odds are you're going to have very basic math equations, but they can throw in, you could have a harder test, or you could have some harder questions mixed in there. So memorize all the fundamental equations of math. You can find on Booster or Bootcamp, they have Anki decks or equation cheat sheets. Definitely give those a look a few times and know them, know how to find the area of a hexagon, things like that, different side lengths of a triangle and all the fun stuff that you remember from 9th grade. But the biggest thing I would suggest is, when you're taking practice tests, like the chemistries, always make a flashcard of questions you miss. Math, more than any other subject, they can only ask you so many questions. They can only ask you so many probabilities, so many coin question, age problems or whatnot, distance time questions. So if you can really understand the format of the question because you've done a bunch of practice questions, you're going to be chilling. You're going to have so much confidence when you see the types of questions they give you on the real thing. At least for my test, I thought, instead of going 3 or 4 steps in on DAT Booster or Bootcamp's practice test, the real DAT went 2 steps or even 1 step in depth of knowledge on QR. And so that meant I felt so confident when I was taking my QR. I think I had 32 questions done with 15 minutes to spare. And when I saw that, I really started letting off the gas in terms of speed. And I ended up only being able to review for 5 minutes because I slowed down my pace so much. So don't do that. I recommend like look at the time to pace yourself, but don't get ahead of yourself when seeing how much time you have remaining. But yeah, like I felt the math was easier on the real thing than the practice test. I was averaging anywhere from an 18 to a 23, I think was my highest on math and practice test. I ended up getting a 22 on the real thing. So, yeah, I was happy with math. Like I was most worried about that. I was having, nightmares the night before thinking I'm going to go drop a 7 or 16 in math and have to retake the DAT. Luckily, I don't have to. But I'll edit me in, or I'll post another clip of me with my actual score report. But so that means I got a 22 in bio, 22 Gen Chem, 30 OChem, 25 PAT, 20 reading, and 22 QR. That equates to a 23 total science and a 23 academic average. I'm very happy with my score. As someone who didn't have the most linear path to college or good start in college, like I couldn't be happier with that DAT score. I think that genuinely anyone can do well on this test depending on the amount of time you're willing to put in and study, how much you're willing to sacrifice. I would say the hardest part is going to be sacrificing your social life a little bit, your lifestyle a little bit. I know for me, like I love to go to the gym. I love to spend quality time with my fiance, with friends, with family. I had to sacrifice a lot of those things. Of course, the time with the fiance you can't sacrifice, but I didn't see my friends for a few months and spent a little less time with my family, didn't hit the gym as often. So be prepared for that. There's going to be mental obstacles you face when studying for this test that you're just going to have to get through. So be mindful of that. And I just want to finish this off with just general advice, last few words here. Have a support system around you in studying for this test. I would not recommend scheduling a DAT day and starting studying if you really have some things in your life that are already weighing heavy on your mind, because this is more mental than anything else. It's breadth over depth, absolutely. Like the level of knowledge you actually got to know this stuff at to do well on the DAT isn't very high. You just have to know a lot of things, and to be able to like fill your mind and memorize so many things and equations and concepts, like you're going to have a stability in your life. So make sure you have a strong support system when going into it. I just want to give a special shout out to my fiance. Like literally, if it wasn't for, talks on the phone at night, helping me get through tough days of studying, or helping me out, like making me food sometimes or whatnot. Like she literally helped me so much with staying mentally strong for the test. So special shout out to her. She's amazing. That's why I'm marrying her, this summer. Or one of the many reasons, I should say. But other than that, find other people like yourself to study with. At our school, Utah Valley University in Utah, my heart's in the name, I shouldn't have said that. I created like a DAT study session for our pre-dental club. That way other pre-dentals who are studying for the DAT could meet me in the mornings from 7 to 9 a.m. And, for a while it was just one other person, but eventually we got like 4 or 5 people in there consistently every day studying with me. And, a lot of the times we just have our headphones in, we're all independently working, but I found that having someone to join you on the journey it makes it so much easier than, locking yourself in a room in the library and doing it yourself. Like it's like going to war. Like you'll be bonded over those experiences of being in the trenches together and hit the books really hard and, holding each other accountable every morning to wake up early and be at school at 7 a.m. to start studying for 2 hours. So I'd recommend doing that. Also, I should have said this. I think I kind of touched on it, but I want to go more in detail. I started studying lightly in November. I just brushed up on a few concepts from classes I hadn't taken in a while, like math. And I really started studying in January. I was doing this while working 2 jobs, 2 part-time jobs, and taking a full course or full semester worth of credits, while also, having a wedding planning and maintaining a life and family and whatever, like doing all those things, right? So don't think that you have to put a hold on life to do all this. You can do it. However, I had like a month between when my classes ended and when my DAT was, and I felt like that month I learned more and got 1,000 times more done than I ever did while doing everything at once. So if you can, try and schedule yourself in a similar way, or give yourself more time in the summer, maybe 2 or 3 months in the summer of just DAT, no other classes to focus on. I think you could do much, much better than I did. So I'd recommend doing that, especially if you feel like you don't have a strong foundation in some of your classes. Other than that, and I studied for 7 to 9 a.m. every day in the mornings, and then would have school, get off at like 4, work, do whatnot. Then I'd study again from like 7 to like 11 at night. So around 6 hours a day for about 5 months. So that was I took 15 practice tests, averaged about, my first one was a 17. I started to average in the 20s about 2 months out. And then my last 5 tests were 22s plus, with my high being a 24. So yeah, that was my DAT journey. It was amazing and not cruel, a grind, I should say. And it's something I'll never forget. So if you like this, hit a like, subscribe, and comment anything, or reach out if you have any questions. Thanks. See ya.